Okay, thank you, Juan, and thank you to Martin as well for his keynote speech, which is of course going to be a little bit of a tough act to follow, but I will try. So I am Sander Bangma. I joined Moodle in November last year, so still fairly new, and this is my first Moodle Moot, so it's actually very exciting to see so many people here and learn about all the things that you do with Moodle. So thanks so much for coming to listen to my talk, which will be on some of the new features in Moodle 3.5. So when I joined Moodle, I have to say Martin pretty much threw me in the deep end. Here's a team, here's a bunch of features that need to go into the next release, and away you go. But we released Moodle 3.5 last month, and I think we did a really great job, and we've got a great team of developers, I have to say. So thank you very much to the entire team. There's a bunch of the developers are here, so I would encourage you to reach out to them and speak with them. They are very, very friendly and more than willing to help out or comment on things, so it'd be great to have a chat to them. And not only that, we also have a great community of developers out there who've contributed to 3.5, so thanks to them as well. But let's get started then on what's new in Moodle 3.5, and I'll look at it from a number of different perspectives. First, focusing on more the site administrator's perspective. There's a lot of features there, so that'll be the largest part of the session. Then we'll look at some features more from a course management or teacher perspective, and then at some things that affect all of the users. And I'll finish off with a single slide on the mobile app. Juan will be doing more presentations on that later, so I won't really go into any depth, but the mobile app was released earlier this week and it looks fantastic, so I encourage everybody to go and check it out. So under site administration, I will cover a number of topics, starting off with GDPR, and I'll spend quite a bit of time going through the new features there. So GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the new EU legislation that has come into effect to help individuals in the protection of their personal data. The goal of GDPR is to really harmonize all the privacy laws in the EU, but importantly also, and this is what Moodle thinks is really, really important, is to empower the individuals with control over their data. So I'm sure everyone here, just like me, has registered online with hundreds of different sites, and all of your personal data are stored by these different sites, but what exactly is stored, what do they do with it, and if you no longer want your data stored there, how do you get it out? So GDPR empowers the individuals with control over their data. So new in Moodle 3.5 then are privacy settings, policy settings, and additional features for managing personal data in your Moodle site. And we've released them with 3.5, but they are also available as plugins that you can download from the plugin database for Moodle 3.3 and 3.4. So for sites that are using an older Moodle version, they can install these plugins and comply with GDPR. So let's take a look at these features. Under Site Administration, in the Users tab, there's a new area here for privacy and policies. And when you install a Moodle on your site, you'll get these 6 options listed there to begin with. There are another 2 that you can enable if you go into the policy settings and look at the site policy handler and set that to the new policy tool. So the additional 2 settings you get from that are down the bottom here, manage policies, and an option to look at user agreements, and we'll get to those in a little bit later, but we'll start off by looking at the privacy settings. So under privacy settings, you find an option to enable what we call digital age of consent verification. So as part of the EU legislation, there is this thing called the digital age of consent, and that is the age where you as a user can say, yes, I agree to these policies and I agree to my data being used in this site. And when you enable this option, users that self-register for your Moodle site will then be asked for their age and location to check whether they're above the digital age of consent. Another option that you see slightly lower here is the option to set different types of ages for different countries. So the different countries in the EU have different ages for the digital age of consent. So these can be configured. And we did this because it's likely that over time they will change. So what does that look like when you've enabled this option and a user registered for your site? They will be asked for your age and location. For example, here in Spain, maybe a user wants to register for a site, but they are 11 years old. So in that case, they're not above the age of digital consent. So the Moodle site will check it. And on the bottom right, you see then a message that will be displayed in this case. Because they are below the digital age of consent, they're considered a digital minor. And their consent will need to be obtained through different means, perhaps by getting a signature from their parents, and the site administrator can then enable their account. Some other options on the privacy settings page is an option to enable contacting the data protection officer. Now, when you enable this option, all users on their user profile page will see a new section where you can contact the data protection officer and submit data requests. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. There's also the option to enable role mapping for the data protection officer. So there are a number of new capabilities that you can configure into a role which you can assign to a user if they are the data protection officer. So this is convenient because you don't necessarily need to be the site administrator to manage data requests and the data privacy of your site. So next we'll take a look then at the data requests. So for example, here we see a user, a student, Mark, and he wants to contact the data protection officer because he would like an export of his personal data. In this case, he's leaving college and he wants a copy of his data. So when he submits this request, he will see that request listed on the data request page. So what type is it? It's an export of all of my personal data because he'd like to take a copy with him. The status is pending. And this is because there's now an alert that's been sent to the data protection officer that a request has been received and will need to be approved. So until that is done, the status will be pending. Once the request is complete and approved and processed, you'll be able to download the zip file from here. When we then take a look from the data protection officer point of view, we now are looking at the same site administration area. It's just locked down for the data protection officer role. So there's a subset of the GDPR site administration pages available, one of them being data requests. This is where they will go to look at the incoming data requests, but also there's a little notification up top there. So the data protection officer is notified that a data request has come in, and it's something that they'll need to look at. So this is what they'll see. So we see the request that has just come in from Mark. It's of type export, so he would like a copy of his data, and the current status is awaiting approval. So the data protection officer can now take several actions, view the request to read the message in more detail, or approve and deny the request. If they approve the request, the background task will run to collect all of the personal data for this particular user on the site, and once that's available, the user will be notified. Next on the list of new pages for GDPR is the data registry, which is a very important page because under GDPR there needs to be a very specific reason why you collect data, and there needs to be a particular retention period associated with it. You can't retain your data for longer than you need. So this is what that looks like for all the data in your Moodle site. You can assign a particular category, which is really what type of data is it. You can assign a purpose. Why are you storing that data? There needs to be a valid reason for storing your data. And you can associate a retention period with it. So for example, here we look at course data that's used for assessments. This is why we're storing it. And we're retaining it for 7 years after the course has ended. And then once that retention period has come and gone and the data is now ready for deletion, there's a background task that runs on the Moodle site that actually identifies all these bits of data that are now ready for deletion. And then you can go to the data deletion page where these, for example, in this case, courses are shown that are now scheduled for deletion. So here We've got Introduction to Maths and Introduction to Programming. Their retention period was 1 year, but has just been expired. And the data protection officer now has the option to delete both courses, or if they want to retain some, they can deselect the checkbox, and then that course will not be deleted. If you do go ahead and delete the course, then all of the personal data in that course will be removed. We also built something we call the plugin privacy registry, and we have a look at it here. There are many, many plugins in Moodle, also in the core distribution, and a subset of those collect and store personal data. And for these GDPR data requests, we needed to be able to ask every plugin to supply the personal data that they store. So we've built what we call the Privacy API for Moodle, and all the plugins in the Moodle core distribution implement that Privacy API, which means that we can request a copy of their data and then provide that in a download for the user, or we can go in and actually delete the data that they store. So this will list all the plugins in the core distribution, but also additional plugins that you've installed. And if a particular plugin doesn't implement the Privacy API, it means that the personal data stored in that plugin won't be able to be retrieved through the standard data requests. So this will be flagged with a little warning triangle. So then you can decide whether you want to use this plugin on your site or you don't. I guess you have the option to also implement the Privacy API if you've got developers able to work on it. So this is a way to audit all the plugins in your Moodle site. Then lastly, we can look at the two options we enabled by setting the policy tool as the site policy handler. The first one being Manage Policies, which looks like this. So this is a page where you can create different types of policies for your site. That'll be displayed to users who register for your site. But also for existing users, if you make changes to a policy and you feel that this is an important change and the users need to reconsent, you can enforce that this will be shown to the users when they first log in to the site. So in this example, we've created a site policy. The status is active. Other things we can see are over here. We can see how many of the users on the site have already agreed to this particular policy. And there's a number of actions we can do. We can view the policy to read it, we can edit it, or we can change its status back to inactive if we no longer want to use it and perhaps switch to a different policy. There are a few different types of policies you can create. Another one you can create is a privacy policy. So this could look like this. This could be shown to the user. Once you've just activated the policy, the user is supposed to read the entire text and then click Next. The user can also see how many other policies there are. So this is policy 2 out of 3. So they know that after this policy there's another one to read. And then once they've read all of the policies, they will get to this consent page. And the consent page really summarizes all the different policies that you've enabled for your site. And very importantly, for each policy, there's a checkbox that you can specifically agree to that policy and the statements within it. So this is very important under GDPR. And once you've agreed to all of the policies, is when you'll be able to access the site. And then finally, we will take a look at user agreements, which is a tool we built to enable us to, I guess, audit which users have agreed to which policies. So in this example, we see a site policy here. We see a user, Barbara. She's ticked off on that, so she's agreed to the site policy. We also see Brenda. She's agreed to the site policy as well. I'm not sure whether you can see, but there's different colors of ticks here. So the green tick means that the user themselves have consented to this policy. If there's a blue tick, then someone else has consented to that policy on their behalf. This could be a parent or a site administrator who's obtained consent through a different way. And we can also see that Frances, she's got a red cross listed there, so she's not agreed to this policy just yet. So that was, I guess, a brief overview of the new GDPR functions that we've developed. There's quite a lot to it, so feel free to ask questions of myself or any of the developers here. And then there's another few topics that I wanted to touch on from a site administrator perspective. The first one being some new capabilities, and I actually won't go into all of them, but I just wanted to highlight that there's a number of capabilities that are associated to GDPR around managing the data registry and data requests. So if you combine these and allow them, you can create the data protection officer role. There are also a bunch of capabilities that are related to the new policies and managing those. So quite a few of these new capabilities are related to the GDPR functions. The next few I'll skip through a little bit quicker, starting off with global search. So we made some improvements to global search. Firstly, to Solar, there are improved capabilities there to filter by user or filter by section titles and summaries, so more powerful options there. But a very cool new feature is what we call simple global search. So the nice thing about this is that there's no longer the need to install an external search engine to enable global search on your site. So when you go into your global search settings as an administrator, you can select under search engine, simple search, at which point in time global search on your site will be enabled for the users, and there's no need to connect an external search engine. We've also added support for LTI Advantage, which provides additional functionalities under LTI, such as name and role provisioning services, which means that you can send lists of course participants to LTI tools, extended capabilities for linking, as well as assignment and grade services, which means that assignment results can come back from the LTI tool into Moodle. Another feature we added in this release was the option to allow cohort themes. So you can see this under the cohort or under the theme settings. You can allow cohort themes, which is a very nice feature because if as a site administrator you've got multiple cohorts on your site, you can differentiate them and give them different themes under the cohort settings. So it's a nice feature that we've added there. We've also added several new features under badges, new criteria for which you can award badges. The first one that we added is cohort badges. So not only can you assign a particular theme to a cohort, you can also assign a badge to a user if they're a member of a cohort. So here, the September 2018 cohort badge is being created. The criteria is cohort membership. So if a user is a member of this cohort, we can assign them this badge. So this will show in their user profile. Another thing we've added, which is a pretty cool feature, is the ability to award a badge based on users uploading their profile picture. We all know it's much nicer to be on a site where there's images for each user, and this is really a way to encourage users to upload their profile picture, which makes the site look a lot nicer, and the user will be happy because they'll be awarded a badge when they've received this. And there's another badge criteria which we'll actually look at under the next section here, which is about course management, so a number of features that are more applicable from a teacher's perspective. Starting off with badge criteria, we'll also look at recording sound and video and several improvements for quiz. But the third badge criteria is that you are now able to award a badge based on previous badges that have been awarded to that user. So this allows you to set a certain order in which you need to collect badges, a certain number of steps that a student would have to go through before they get the final badge. In this case, there's a vegetarian cook badge, and to be able to be awarded this badge, there's another 3 badges that the user needs to earn first. Then this new feature is really very exciting. We now have improved abilities to directly record sound and video in Moodle through the Atto editor. So this enables us to do some very cool things. So for example here, a teacher is creating a new assignment, and in the description they now have several new options. So you can see 2 icons here. One is for recording audio, there's a little microphone. And the one that the user has, or the teacher has clicked on just now, is this one here, which is to record video. So this allows the teacher to record a video with some instructions for the students as part of the assignment. So when we then look at the assignment in its final form, we see the video of the teacher there. So this is a very nice and personal way for the teacher to deliver some instructions on how to proceed with the assignment. Then I want to talk about a few improvements that we've made to quiz. In this case, it's around quiz essays. And we've added the ability for teachers to specify what file types students can upload as part of their quiz essay question. So when you click on the Choose button, you can specify what type of file. In this case, the teacher specified a document file, which will then in turn restrict the student to be able to upload only those files with extensions listed there. Another thing we've improved for quiz essays is when you're grading quiz essay questions, is that there's now improved abilities to also upload files, but importantly also give audio and video feedback, similar to what you saw for creating the assignment. So that's another very nice way to give some personal feedback to a student. And then the final improvement around quiz is the question bank tag filtering project. Now this was a project that was supported and funded by the Moodle User Association, and I know Richard is here. So we're very grateful to be working with the MUA on these sort of projects. So this was a project that the MUA voted on, and we have included in 3.5. So improved abilities to manage questions for the question bank. So we were always able to tag questions, but now we've got better options to actually filter questions based on tags as you're composing your quizzes. We've also added an option to click on the tag icon there and directly from this screen add additional tags. So it's easier to manage your questions for quizzes that you want to compose. And that works for question bank as well as for adding random questions. Then we'll take a quick look at some features that affect all of the users. Course images, Bootstrap 4, that privacy and policies section in the user profile that I mentioned before, as well as some changes to the choice activity. Now, course images are now able to be shown on the dashboard, which is something that I'm really happy that we were able to include that, because it makes the Moodle site look much, much nicer. We'll look at it a little bit larger, but we can now see that the courses can be defined with a nice little image, which makes the site look very attractive. And what's also very cool is that we've added this type of image here. So when you don't upload an image for your course, Moodle will create a random sort of patterned image that will be assigned to your course to make it all look consistent and add nice sort of visual features to it. We've also worked hard on what we call the Bootstrap 4 stable upgrade, which is basically the library that's sitting underneath the Boost theme. Upgrading that will give us additional capabilities later on to build on that and do further user interface and usability improvements. There's some minor changes in the Boost theme, not very big just yet, but it's setting us up down the track to do more work. But importantly, and I wanted to point this out, if you've got a custom theme that you're using at the moment for Boost, just make sure that before you upgrade your site to 3.5, that you check whether your theme still works. You might need to make minor modifications. And we've created a web page on Moodle Docs that gives you some pointers on how to upgrade your theme to work with Bootstrap 4 stable. Some of the changes that coming from the Bootstrap 4 stable upgrade is that we see some nice icons here in the navigation drawer, so they've been added. There's new fonts available for the site, so the entire look is slightly different, slightly more modern. And we've got improved capabilities, for example, here in the user menu, where you can group different items together and add little separators to separate other things. So small incremental changes, but it's setting us up down the track to do more work. Then, related to GDPR, as I mentioned before, you can enable the option to contact the data protection officer as a site administrator. And what happens when you do that is that in the user's profile page, there's a new section for privacy and policies. So under there's a number of options. You can contact your data protection officer, which is sending them a message. You can click on this link for data requests, which is what we saw student Mark do earlier in the presentation. He requested a copy of his data. You can also request for your data to be deleted. And there's a link for each user or student to to view the policies that they have agreed to. So that'll provide the student with an overview of the different policies that apply to your site and which ones they've agreed to. And then finally, we've also made some changes to the choice activity. And what we've added here is a little alert that will inform students up front as to how the results will be published. So in this case, we see that anonymous results will be published after the activity is closed. So this is nice because sometimes students would prefer not to be identified by their choice, and we can now inform them up front so they don't have to be concerned about the results and how they will be made available. And then finally, I've really just one slide on the mobile app, which is really not sufficient, but Juan will be talking much more about this later today. We've just released the new Moodle app, version 3.5, which is an incredible new release, and it comes with a new user interface. It's much improved. The mobile app also has support for the course images we saw earlier. And importantly, we've got improved support for plugins, so it's now easier to add plugins that will work in the mobile app. And there's many, many more things that were added, and Juan will talk about that later. And that really wraps this presentation up for me.